Listen, just one more thing.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of episode 3 of season 6 of Colombo, the Bye Bye Sky High IQ murder case. First broadcast on the 22nd of May 1977 on NBC. It was written by Colombo newcomer Robert Malcolm Young. Young has dozens of writing credits to his name, mostly for television, but also for a couple of early horror films. He's written for everything from It Takes a Thief to The Magical World of Disney. He was born on the 22nd of November 1924. He is 97. The episode was directed by Sam Wanamaker. Wanamaker was born on the 14th of June 1919 in Chicago. His acting career began in the late 30s and was interrupted by World War II, where he served in the US Army. In the early 50s, fearing the communist witch hunt, he fled to the UK, where he would remain working in theatre for most of the rest of his career. He would appear in such films as The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Private Benjamin, Superman 4, and in television in Danger Man, The Outer Limits, and Gunsmoke, amongst many other roles, as well as turning to directing. He campaigned for the reconstruction of the Globe Theatre in London, which was finally achieved in 1997, although sadly he never lived to see its completion, as he died on the 18th of December 1993. His daughter, actor Zoe Wanamaker, is a trustee and was the first person to speak on stage after its completion. He was 74 when he died. The episode begins with a mysterious figure approaching a meeting at a private club. The figure sneaks in and we get a POV shot of them looking at Bertie Hastings, played by Sorrel Book. Book was perhaps best known as Boss Hogg in The Dukes of Hazzard, but has already made a brief appearance in Columbo in the episode Swan Song. Bertie is listening to Mike give a talk. Mike is played by Kenneth Mars. The figure makes his way upstairs and into the study. We can then see it's Oliver Brandt, played by Theodore Bickel. Bickel was born on the 2nd of May 1924 in Vienna, Austria. As a Jew, he and his family fled to Palestine after the German annexation of Austria, and later moved to the UK to study at RADA. He became a US citizen in 1961, having moved there in 1954. He had a varied career in film and television, appearing in The African Queen, The Defiant Ones, and My Fair Lady on the big screen, and such TV shows as The Fall Guy, Knight Rider, and this episode of Columbo, as well as many other roles. But he was also a talented folk musician, making over 20 albums, and able to sing in 21 different languages. He was also a co-founder of the Newport Folk Festival. In addition to playing a genius in this episode of Columbo, he was also a real-life member of Sky High IQ Club Mensa. He died on the 21st of July 2015. He was 91. Worth noting that despite having a different writer, we have another character with the surname Brandt in the last episode. Also worth noting that by how we're introduced to Oliver Brandt, it seems pretty clear that he will be the murderer and Bertie will be the victim. But we don't know yet as to why. As we see Oliver set up his elaborate murder plot, back at the lecture, Mike is just finishing, and we're introduced to character actor Basil Hoffman, playing Jason Danziger, who appears to be chairing the meeting. He briefly mentions the importance of a burglar alarm before Oliver enters and makes fun of Bertie as the meeting draws to a close.
Dear me, I didn't know we had anything worth stealing. Unless, of course, it's Bertie's incredible brain power.
At drinks afterwards, Oliver apologises to Bertie for always poking fun at his friend and partner. Here we also meet Miss Eisenbach, who quickly establishes herself as not being part of the Sky High IQ Club.
Something wrong?
I think I just drank my contact lens. It's there. I found it. I'm sorry.
Also, there's young Caroline Trainer, played by Carol Jones, making an inventory of everything in the clubhouse for the insurance, and who demonstrates some form of photographic memory. Despite the existence of photographic memory being somewhat debunked, it remains a common trope in fiction as shorthand for a character's intelligent, which is exactly what they're doing here. So I can't really take issue with it any more than the use of silencers on guns. Bertie wants to speak to Oliver, but Oliver insists on playing a word game before they do. They go to Oliver's study, and Bertie says he's sick of Oliver's teasing, and he knows Oliver is embezzling money from their customers. Bertie intends to expose Oliver, and Oliver is aware of this, so he shoots Bertie with a silenced gun. See previous comment. With Bertie dead, Oliver enacts his plan to alibi himself, hiding the gun in an umbrella, which he then hides up the chimney, before taking the money from Bertie's wallet, opening the door to his study, and finally setting up an elaborate Rube Goldberg-like machine which will activate when a record stops. Oliver returns to the others, claiming victory, and after a few moments the record finishes with the sound of gunshots and a thud, as Oliver had planned. They all rush upstairs, and while the others are distracted by the sight of Bertie's body, Oliver disassembles his device, and so once again it would appear someone has planned the perfect murder. If he is able to fool these geniuses with his scheme, will he be able to fool Columbo? I mean, I think we already know the answer to that, 6th season in, but the joy, as always, is in how he does it. The police arrive on the scene, and Oliver is called to the scene of the crime by a sergeant as the other police leave. He's left alone for a moment, and we get a rare glimpse of a murderer almost being undone by his own carelessness, as he absent-mindedly wipes his brow with the handkerchief he used to hide the umbrella, getting soot on his brow. He notices and frantically tries to get rid of it as he hears footsteps approach the room. This has echoes of Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, as he finishes and goes to the door, only to find out it's Caroline asking if they know who did it yet. He slams the door on her, and Colombo comes in via an adjoining door. He was there the whole time, and may well have seen Oliver's little performance. If he did, he keeps it to himself. Oliver explains what the club is, and Columbo explains he had no idea he was talking to a group of geniuses.
Here I've been talking with the most intelligent people in the world, and I never even noticed.
This is a very clever bit of wordplay here, with Columbo appearing to suggest that he is far too simple to notice how clever this group is, but the subtext is that he actually wipes the floor with all of them intellectually speaking. This really is as close as the character comes to flaunting his intelligence, but it's never overt. They go through what appears to have happened, and Oliver absent-mindedly starts a model train, and again Columbo drops a hint to his own intellect by asking if geniuses play with model trains, and when Oliver says they do, he says that's comforting, as he could play with them forever. He then says that everyone apart from Caroline remembers hearing the burglar. Oliver says he doesn't remember. With all the witnesses assembled, they all say they remember hearing the burglar flee, but also have conflicting memories of it, which is an entirely accurate representation of witness statements, even amongst the high of IQ, and which Columbo is well aware of. As Colombo escorts Oliver out, they have an exchange over Colombo's own IQ, and he claims not to know it, which might well be true, but might not be. He's very much playing his part here, so I think it's safe to assume he has Oliver at the top of his suspects list. Oliver gives Columbo a logic problem to solve, and based on the game he used to play with Bertie, it certainly seems he sets this problem not to test Columbo's intelligence, but to win the game. I am a big fan of how much the script relies on subtext, allowing us to do the work rather than just telling us information. Oliver returns home and buries the device he attached to the record player in his shrubbery. He is greeted by his wife Vivian, played by Samantha Eggar. Vivian notices there's still some soot on his brow as he explains about Bertie's murder. She seems less concerned than him about this, which is surprising considering he murdered Bertie, so maybe it is weighing on his conscience. The next day, Columbo visits Oliver's accounting firm and finds out about office politics while he waits for Oliver, who is back at the clubhouse further disposing of evidence. On the advice of Oliver's secretary, Columbo catches up with Oliver in the park, and as Columbo goes to get an ice cream, Oliver hides the gun in a bin and then panics as it comes out of the bag. Luckily for Oliver, the bin is collected before Columbo notices. At the clubhouse, Columbo is doing some real detective work and notices a mark on the book that Oliver used as the sound of the falling body, as well as the fact that, under the right circumstances, the rear door closes when the main door closes. He's then accosted by Caroline and Danziger with their own theories about the murder and how it was committed. And while he seems slightly frustrated by this, they both do get elements of the crime correct.
I think he was killed before we heard the shots, because we never heard the real shots.
To glance up the chimney, I'm sure you'll find the gun.
They just get everything else wrong. What's interesting, though, is that Columbo reveals he already checked the chimney for the murder weapon. He doesn't mention when, though. If he had checked it on the night of the murder, then he would have already discovered the umbrella and gun in place, and purposely left it there for Oliver to move, meaning he's known since then. The way the scene is structured, it's clearly meant for you to think he didn't check until after Oliver had removed it. There really is a lot going on in this episode that you do need to pay close attention to. That evening, Columbo is greeted at Oliver's house by Vivian, and he's got soaked in the rain because his wife is cleaning his raincoat. I think it's safe to assume he did this on purpose, as we know how fond he is of that raincoat. And this is an excuse for him to have brought an umbrella with him. He also observes Oliver has the same record player as the club and finds out it can be programmed to start at a certain song. He clearly knows what Oliver did and now knows Oliver practiced. In perhaps the most dated scene in a Columbo episode, and for no reason other than the fun of it, Columbo goes to see Oliver's former secretary, now accountant partner in his own right, at a nightclub. And it's worth noting that Columbo is now carrying Oliver's umbrella. He suggests the accountant is aware of Oliver's embezzling, which makes him an accessory, and leaves it at that. So Columbo has the means, opportunity, and motive now. The question is, how does he prove any of this? The next day he goes to see the accountant in a restaurant and has a funny interaction with a very surly waitress who just happens to be the daughter of a former Columbo guest star. The accountant, George Campanella, admits he discovered the embezzlement and that led to his promotion. Oliver arrives and Columbo excuses himself, leaving Campanella to tell Oliver what Columbo really wanted. Oliver goes back to his office and Columbo is there waiting for him. Oliver is on edge, but we see Columbo go back to his bag of tricks and tell Oliver he thinks Bertie was the one embezzling. We've seen him do stuff like this before to relax a potential suspect, while he looks for proof. But Oliver doesn't really seem that relaxed as he goes home and tells his wife about the embezzling he did to keep her in a life of luxury. He then gets a call from police asking him to go to his club. He arrives and the place is silent and in darkness. He hears the record player, followed by gunshots, and he begins to flee, only to be stopped by a sergeant. Columbo calls down to him and invites him up to the study, which he has no alternative but to oblige. Columbo explains exactly how the record player looks to have been set up and then accuses Oliver, which stuns him. But Columbo pulls a double bluff and reveals he was talking about the problem Oliver had set him on the night of the murder. Columbo claims Mrs. Columbo had come up with the solution and demonstrates the answer to Oliver.
I know exactly what you did and how you did it. The gold sack puzzle, sir.
After he's done this, he gives Oliver a little insight into how he got to be such a great detective. He claims that he wasn't the smartest guy in the room, but he worked harder than anyone else. Oliver says he had the opposite problem. He didn't have to work hard, but he missed out on having a life. It elicits a certain level of sympathy quite late in the episode that is unexpected. Columbo then explains exactly how Oliver carried out his murder, step by step, as he gets closer and closer to his finale. Oliver attempts to poke holes in his theory, but Columbo persists, but purposely gets one detail wrong.
This is what he would have done. This! There!
It ends with Columbo giving Oliver a clue to the fact that he is indeed far more intelligent than he lets on, which seems to give Oliver some comfort as he accepts his fate.
Lieutenant, have you ever considered a different line of work?
Me, sir? No. Never.
Another fantastic episode, and also one that's biggest flaw is that it isn't long enough, which is really surprising for me to say, as I generally prefer the shorter episodes. Maybe it's a case of always leave them wanting more. It's not perfect. I really feel that the IEQ Club is underused. We get so little of Kenneth Mars, who had already established himself as a brilliant performer in the Mel Brooks films The Producers and Young Frankenstein, amongst others. It's almost as if he's there as a favour to somebody. Miss Eisenberg's character is completely underdeveloped, with only 2 character moments, and it's never actually established who she is or why she's there. Mr. Wagner doesn't even get a first name. With a little more time, we could have had each of them come to Colombo with their big brain theory of what happened, instead of just Danziger and Caroline. Mrs. Brandt is also fairly underdeveloped and more of an afterthought to justify Oliver's motive for embezzling. It would have been nice if we'd had just one scene of him showing genuine affection towards her. Other than that, though, it's a fairly perfect episode. The murder plot is clever, and how Columbo unravels it is even cleverer. The motive is well established and elucidated on throughout the episode. The cast all put in stellar performances, even those with little screen time. The humour fits the tone perfectly, and there are some really funny performances in small roles, such as Kathleen King as Susie, the girl in the nightclub. The gotcha fits the episode perfectly, and while it's not hugely showy, it is well thought out and executed. Particular credit to Theodore Bickel, who delivers an incredibly nuanced performance as Oliver, developing the character to be sympathetic and tortured, as well as arrogant and ego-driven. It's just well done all around. I have to give this 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.